button and I disappear from myself. I want to welcome you all to Hamlet number 5, South Salem Hamlet. It's the governmental center and just about the geographical center of our town. We are basically going to approach this hamlet in our wonderful shotgun-shaped town by, first of all, by traveling the 2 main roads. First of all, going down Route 35, just a little bit past the town park, as Dana said, and then we are going to come back and start over again up by Le Chateau and come down Spring Street. Spring Street segues into Main Street, and we'll travel that road until we get to Boughton Road, and then we'll come back to the village, go out the end of Spring Street, and when we're done with all that, we are going to pick up what we missed, and that would be the folks who live on the various hills around here, meaning the people who came and built large houses during the turn of the 20th century. So without hopefully too much going wrong here, I will somehow, okay, we need this out of the way. Uh-oh.
You had the arrow.
I know I do, but I don't have the one to make it big. I have this other stuff in the way.
The arrow is on the bottom, right?
I know, and the bottom isn't coming up for me. Got this, got to get the, I've got all the other things in the way. All right, anyway, hopefully I'll get the arrow back. I just can't get rid of the pause share, new share, all that garbage. Anyway, this is a little pick the name of our town, a little quiz, and just eyeball those numbers for a while. And when we get to the end of the program, we will come back to it and see if you have figured out what name our town went by during those years. I cannot make the screen bigger. How can I get out of this?
You want hit escape and see?
Yeah, maybe. No, it's not doing, it's just our basic Beers map of the town
Oh,
from
Maureen, it didn't come up.
our town. South Salem is this big, looks like if you thought of a leg, I guess, instead of a shotgun. Here we have the kneecap and South Salem. And we won't go any further into that, but we are going to be starting, as she said, at the traffic light at 123. And now I don't have, was I there? Now I think we can go on to the next one, which is welcome to South Salem Hamlet Center. And this is the corner of Spring Street and Route 35. And from here, we are going to take a trip along Route 35. I would guess this is the late or mid early 1940s, probably. It has to be because Route 35 is paved and it became a paved road about 1937. They moved the road. They realigned Route 35 from Cross River into, well, actually from Katona all the way to Richfield. This is the big rock cutting, and down here we can just barely see the intersection with Boughtonville Road. So actually this was a picture from a police accident report. There were several, but I thought this was the best. All right, traveling down Route 35. First item of interest we come to after the traffic light, and we're going back to talk about Le Chateau later, but we come to the hayloft. The hayloft was the gathering place for many years. It started out as a barn on Spring Street and Boughtonville Road. It started out as the Bacon Barn. The Sfondrinis bought the barn and had it moved from Spring Street out to Hayloft Flats, what became known as Hayloft flats out on Route 35. And for many years was a very popular eatery, place to have uh, ceremonial dinners, like the fire department would have a dinner there, the ladies auxiliaries from the Vista Fire Department. It was a happening place. It changed hands after the Sfandrinis uh, no longer ran it, and it became a couple of places, and the one I'm remembering right off the bat is Gabriel's, because when Gabriel's burned down, my son went there with a wagon and some friends and brought back some of the letters that had fallen off the roof. Going a little bit further, we mentioned the fire at Gabriel's, the ex hayloft, and we come to the South Salem Fire Department. In the early 1950s, the fire department acquired this property on Route 35. And this is from 1973, and it's the original firehouse and their first two-bay addition. But the fire department wasn't always there. It was formed in 1938, and it was formed down at George Tater's garage, the Tater Dodge dealers. And from 1938 until 1951, it was housed at the Tater's Dodge dealership. And here we have a picture from the fire department scrapbook showing their original 1924 truck meeting their brand new 1948 firefighter truck. This 24 Dodge is still in operation, at least for parades, and has won many ribbons and trophies as the oldest fire truck in the parade. Here you can see, right, 121 back here. And this little house was for a long time, Charlie Tater's wife ran it as a little antique shop. And this little building is still out on Route 121. Tater's Garage was one of the original Dodge dealerships in the United States. It started around 1909, and George Tater, Charlie Tater's father, and Chuck Tater's grandfather sponsored a racing team, a dirt racing team, and this is one of their racing cars on its way to one of the dirt tracks in the area. There was a gentleman named Mr. Ganung from Katona, who was one of their best drivers, race car drivers. All right, we're going to go down the hill from the fire department on Route 35, and we're coming to this known as the South Salem Inn, one of the many South Salem inns that we have in our area. This was, at this point, it was owned by the Lassen family, and that the Lassens, eventually, the Lassens bought from the Taters, who bought the property about 1924, about the same time as we saw that old fire truck. And before, this is on the corner, this is Route 35, and right down here, you come to Boughton Road. And now this whole area is the Boughton Road mobile station, because this house was torn down in the early 1970s. Originally, it was a much smaller house built by Thomas Mead way back in the early 1800s, and his sons inherited the property, and then they built this house around in the early 1870s, in the modern style of the day with the mansard roof. And this house was built to the same specifications as the Tater house, which is still standing next to the Tater garage down on 121. So this house, though, served for many years as a personal home. And then when the Lassens bought it, it became an inn. And they had an ice cream stand next to the house. So ice cream and snacks to all those people who like to take driving trips on Sunday afternoons and come up to the country. But then in the 1950s, Jack Hilbert, who lived in town, he and his first wife, bought the inn, and they had it as an inn for several decades. And for part of that time, they housed veterans who had been released from the Montrose Veterans Hospital. And those men lived in the house, some of them worked for the town highway department and were known about town. It was a very congenial place to live, apparently. And the first Mrs. Hilbert, as well as the second Mrs. Hilbert, Hella, who lives in the chalet next door today, were great cooks. And so it was a great place to have a home. And the Hilberts were wonderful people involved in many things around town. Jack Hilbert was initial in the original Lions, one of the original Lions. One of the most interesting things that I remember, because this was still standing when we moved to town, but it also had some gas pumps, because it did have a gas station out front, but it also had this magnificent wall, a wooden wall filled with hubcaps, where they came from, probably maybe from all the accidents that happened at the corner of Route 35 and Mountain Road. We're traveling down Route 35 a little bit, and I had a hard time finding a good picture of the beginning of the town park. But this is 1967. The town park, 60 plus acres, had been bought from the Adams family and the Kahn family. Kahn family were the ones with the stone barns, I believe. But here we have Supervisor Cyrus Russell and the inimitable Wayne Van Tassel, who we didn't have a park and recs at that time. We had a park and recreational committee, excuse me, and Wayne was the head of that committee and very involved in Westchester County parks and recs, and later moved to Somers and became supervisor of Somers. But here he is in his capacity as head of the town Parks and Recs Commission, and supervising the first handfuls of dirt to make way for the town pool. I think this is a lady named Diane Hussey, but I'm not quite sure of that. Her name wasn't on the back of the photograph. And this is a picture from 1984. Excuse me, too much fooling around at the beginning. This is the town pool just before opening day. It was so hot in 1984 that they opened it early and let all these people come in to swim. Could not find a good contemporary picture of the pool. So believe it that everybody knows what it looks like nowadays. It's had several improvements. It survived teenagers driving a car into it back in the 70s. So now we're...
Sorry, Maureen, somebody unmuted.
Oh, okay. Oh, it sounded like a scream. Somebody in trouble. Anyway.
I think somebody was shocked that somebody's car got in the pool.
Oh, I think so were the people who had to pull it out and the guys that drove it in. Anyway, the pool survived. It had needed a few repairs, but it did survive. And at the dedication of the pool in 1968, July 4th, 1968, the president of the Lewisborough Lions, who was Tim Keeler at the time, suggested that a ski tow be built, and the Lions very nicely agreed that this would be a great project to take on. However, first they would need to buy a little more property so that they would have access to a better hill. So the property was bought, and in 1969, with a lot of work by volunteers, a lot of support by community members and businesses who offered things for free. A ski rope tow was built, and it opened. They missed the first storm in December of 1969, but they did open by January 1970. And this is the look. I probably could make it bigger. This is looking up the ski tow where the rope would go up to the top, and doesn't look like much of a hill, but it was. It went up. Right now, we'd be standing where the bleachers are on the ball, near the ball field, and going up the hill behind. And this is looking from the top of the hill. There were two ways down. That's the hill going down through the trees. And it was a fun thing to have. It was a rope tow, which not too many rope tows around, especially in small towns like South Salem. But it lasted for about 10 years, and the town just got a little bit, it was costing too much to keep the tow in good shape and being able to pass inspections. And so the rope tow was abandoned, and I was given that plaque to put in my office. So we always have a remembrance of it. Now we're coming to a marker that indicates the miles from New York City on the post road, which was the road traveled, of course, by the stagecoaches to deliver mail from New York. And one of the post roads through our town went to Albany. That would have been the one out on Route 22 in Golden's Bridge. And then through South Salem, Cross River, South Salem, Wacabuck, we had the post road that came through Cross River, along Route 35, and then it divided at Meade Street. Now this marker is just before Meade Street. It's on the north side of the road, and what it says is 51 miles from New York. 51 is a little hard to read, but miles from New York is what it says. It's in this cute little doghouse, which apparently in about the 1930s, all the markers that were still extant were given these little doghouses. Now in our town, we have several. The first one is probably more in just before you cross the line into our town. It's near the reservoir down on 121, and that's 49 miles. There's one in Cross River on Mark Mead Road, that's 50 miles. This one is 51 miles. And as I said, the post office, the post roads divided. The one just after this one divided, went up toward Vermont, and that's the one that goes past the Wacabuck Country Club. And right in front of the clubhouse at the country club is one that says 52 miles. But if you continue down Route 35 toward Ridgefield, there was another one near the intersection where the light is at 123, but it hasn't been seen since the 1920s. And that was the post road that would go on up toward Danbury. Here, I didn't know what hamlet to put it in, but here is, we'll just do a little bit of talking about the Howland Adams farm, the Adams farm, which was the last dairy farm basically in our town. It is, part of the farm was basically in Wacabuck. Some addresses have it Cross River, but since Howland Adams came from South Salem, grew up in South Salem, went to school in South Salem, before he managed to save enough money to buy a few acres on the Wacabuck, on Meade Street and Route 35. we can count him as a member of any of the hamlets. He has his choice. This is a young Howland Adams, who was born in 1897 and he died in 1978. But one of his first purchases was an ox team, a team of oxen, and here he is leading his team of oxen. He bought 56 acres when he finally saved up enough money and could borrow some from his dad, got a loan from his dad, bought these 56 acres for $85,000. And he had that farm from, I'm not exactly sure when he bought it, probably back in the 30s, and he sold it in the 1960s. Oh, I'm sorry, he didn't buy it. He bought it for $5,000. That sounded a little high to me. He sold it, part of the land that is now the town park, he sold for $85,000 to the town. He could have gotten $100,000 from a developer, but he decided he'd sell to the town. And here is Howland Adams again with one of his dogs. He was a remarkable gentleman. He was a good. He knew the value of a dollar. He saved. He scrimped. He did a lot of haggling, and he was a crusty old gentleman. I have him on a tape from. He also was a member of the fire department, probably a founding member. Have him on a tape discussing old times with the Keeler boys. They talked about stealing watermelons and getting into all sorts of trouble. Although luckily back then there weren't enough cars and there was no pool, so they did not drive any cars into the town pool. All right, we're going to segue from the farmer, Howland, and his cows and his pigs and his animals to go look at a couple of other maps. Now, this is the map of South Salem Hamlet, the central part. We're going to start right down here. Here is, this would be the Jeremiah Keeler house. This is the where the traffic light is at 123. Going out, this is 123 going toward Vista and Lewisborough Hamlet. And here we are coming down what then was the main highway. And it was, I think the number of it at that point was highway number 890. But anyway, here it is coming from that traffic light, which this is 1858. And we're coming down towards South Salem. Now here we are, this would be Woodway going up behind, would be in here. But we're going to continue on what is it's Route 35, but it was Spring Street or the road to Richfield. And here we are on Spring Street. We're coming past, we're at the beginning of Spring Street, just past Le Chateau would be up here. We're coming down into Spring Street. We're coming down into town. And this is 1858. There are mostly farmhouses. We're coming down. This is H.D. Forrest. We'll see his house. He was a blacksmith person. We'll see the Fancher house. This happens to be the house that I live in. I didn't put a picture in, but this would be my house. And then we come to Beauway. We're coming on down into town. This will be another house that we'll see. And we're coming down to the Keeler house in 1858. It's now known as the Horse and Hound. Here are the Presbyterian Church, the parsonage, and the different houses along town. This will turn out to be the townhouse. And we'll follow Main Street until we get up to Boughton Road. Take a little turn up here and come back. And this is Boughton Road going out to what now we know as Route 35. But this is all Spring Street. I was one of the lucky ones because we were right on the main road, and then they decided to put Route 35 right through here. So This would have been, this was going to be Route 35, all farmland at that point. But this was the Thomas Mead House that later was turned into the Hilbert South Salem Inn. Whoops, don't want to go there. Oh, wait, didn't want to do that either. Just one more map, and we're not going to spend too much time on it. It's basically showing us the same thing, except if you were at the Lewisborough Hamlet talk, here's that railroad that came through. This map that did not come through, rather. This map is from 1909. So you can see a few things have changed, but Spring Street, this is Le Chateau now, its own, I'm sorry. This is Le Chateau property. This is the Black Mansion property, but this is still Spring Street as the main highway coming out and going all the way back, going toward Cross River. So times have changed in 50 years, but luckily the railroad never came through. This was another map, the last map you're going to have to endure, I think. But in 1894, a man named Theodore Van Norden came to town. He came as the minister for the Presbyterian Church, which he ministered for about 5 years, then decided real estate was much more exciting and started buying up parcels of land throughout the South Salem Hamlet area. One of the parcels he bought was the Keeler house, which he renamed the Horse and Hound, and that's here. He had this map drawn up in 1907, which was the year that he bought the Horse and Hound. He started buying acreage around what will become Truesdale Lake. He decided that he thought downtown South Salem would look really good with this green. This is Spring Street. This is the Blacksmith Shop next to the Horse and Hound. This is Spring Street coming up toward the church. This would be, as we know it, Main Street, to the lakes, which would have been up to Rippewam, Oskaleta, and Walkabuck. And he has a little roadway coming through here. This was all vacant land. There was no, Dean Travellino's house was not there yet, not for many, many decades. But this was what Theodore Van Norden visualized as downtown South Salem. Now we're going back to the other end of Spring Street for a while, because we saw the map of what Theodore Van Norden thought downtown Spring Street should look like. Now we're going back to where Spring Street begins in the east, past Le Chateau. This building is no longer there. It belonged to Enzo Yacca, who was a landscape architect and a sculptor and an artist, and it was his South Salem studios. There he had a factory, and during World War II, he had a contract with the Naval Department to build model ships, which were used by the Navy pilots and the Air Force, the pilots, the Army. We didn't quite have the Air Force, it was the Army Air Force and the Navy, as reconnoitering to distinguish what kind of ships they were seeing sailing on the ocean. They were all made to specific scales, and they ranged depending on how high a pilot might be flying. He would see, of course, the ships at a different size. This is about the largest model I own. These are the boxes they came in. This happens to be on display in my office. But this model is about 5 or 6 inches long, and they diminish in size until there are some that are, I would say, as big as half of my pinky. They are minuscule and they are amazing. They are collected. They are collectibles. I think if you check out South Salem Studios on eBay, you might come up with something. There were several other factories that did similar things, but South Salem Studios was known throughout the country as making these models, which they did uh, even after World War II, before Enzo's studio was closed. He was making globes for the early space program. He also made models for the World's Fair. He had clients like Carpet Factory, Alexander, or whatever, Carpet in Yonkers, and some of the department stores. And he had mock-ups for the World's Fair in 1939. Going further down Spring Street, we're traveling northwest. We are coming to one of our landmark houses. This is Shaker Hollow. This house at this point in 1983 was owned by Axel Horn, who was a distinguished artist. And he, in 19 as a bicentennial project, a couple named Janice and Ted Strauss organized a landmark program where people would research their houses, build a dossier and a genealogy of their house. We would then, our little committee would then submit the information, if we approved it, to the town board, and they would declare it a landmark house. We have 16 landmark houses in town. Unfortunately, most of them are in South Salem, and we'd really love to have some in Golden's Bridge and Cross River, because those two hamlets do not have a landmark house. But anyway, Axel named his house Shaker Hollow because in the 1920s and 30s, a woman named Juliana Force owned the house. It was her summer home and her weekend home, and she was a collector of Shaker furniture and Shaker objects. But she rented it out to these gentlemen, the Converse family, Atherton and Dorothy, and they operated it as Shaker Hollow Inn. And I just thought I'd show you the menu. Well, it's not quite a menu, but what luncheon would be served from 12:30 to 2, and it would cost you $1 to $1.75. Dinner for an hour and a half in the evening, and then the Sunday night buffet. They endeavored to maintain congenial hospitality and a reputation for delicious food that was formerly enjoyed at Shaker Hollow. Well, Shaker Hollow was was the first inn run there by Herman Smith, who was a Broadway producer. But that kind of went downhill, and so these people took it over and ran it for a few years, but neither was terribly successful. I would say this menu is probably from the late 30s, after Prohibition, because for your convenience, there will be sherries, aperitifs, and a limited selection of wines, but no hard liquors. So it was after Prohibition and before World War II. Juliana Force got a little upset during in 1940. As I said, it was her summer home, and the restaurant was no longer there, but she stopped by on a Sunday, just not telling her housekeepers that she was stopping by, who happened to be a German couple. And when she appeared at the door, the German couple were very, very upset. But Juliana and the women weren't going to let her in, but she had her way, got in, and discovered it was kind of a hangout for a lot of Nazi sympathizers, and the whole house was decorated with swastikas and other German paraphernalia, which was unwanted in Juliana's house during the beginnings of the war. Now we're going a little further down the street. We're coming to May Brooks Log Cabin. This is about a quarter of a mile going, again, we're heading west on Spring Street. And we have come to Maybrook's log cabin. And I think that's Maybrook's and some of her female friends hanging out in front of her log cabin, which was a very popular place. And after May Brooks finished her business closed up, it continued as a log cabin, I believe at Quint's Log Cabin, and then it became Anthony's. When we moved to town to Spring Street in 1966, it was known as Anthony's. But May Brooks ran this as a in the 20s and 30s. It was a speakeasy, and it was also apparently a little bit of a red light district. And I'm wondering if these were May's girls. May lived in the house next door, which is this house, which was the DeForest house, which I said a blacksmith had lived here in the 1850s. This was at that when it was built way back in the late 1700s, maybe it could have been as early as the turn of the century, around 1700. It was a log cabin, but it's been substantially improved upon. But this is where Maybrook lived, and this is probably where her girls worked. And it also, when the Dolores moved in the 1950s, they discovered under the flooring of several of the rooms a whole bunch of bottles from Prohibition, still corked. And I don't know if they still were drinkable, but it was kind of a joke. They discovered the rest of the 1920s and 30s under their floor. I just wanted to go back. When Anthony's burned down in the early 1970s, this modern house was built there. There's a pond right over here. The pond is still there, but Anthony's turned into a 1980s house. Now, next to that log cabin and Dolores that I showed you where the liquor was found under the floor, Maybrook's old red light district house. It's the South Salem Inn, or South Salem Hotel. This was owned by the Sandrinis during Prohibition time. So this was another speakeasy. So all you had to do was walk over the hill and you were right next door at the next speakeasy. This house is another landmark house. So it's the second landmark house we've seen on Spring Street. Axel Horns was the first one, Shaker Hollow. And now we have the home of Charlotte Fancher. It was built by the Fanchers in 1824, I believe. And if you continue on down next door to this house is my house, but I couldn't get a good picture of it the other day. So we're skipping by my house. And we're continuing down Spring Street. We're going to go on to the south side of the road. All the other houses, well, the last several houses were on the north side of the road. This is another landmark house. It's right on the very bad curve as Spring Street turns the corner to go past the church. And this is the home of Thomas Rockwell, who was known to be the last man in South Salem to wear a top hat to church. And other things. I believe he also was a blacksmith, but this house was built around 1820. Note the eyebrow windows. It's a story and a half. And these eyebrow windows figure into one of my ghost stories. So if you happen to come on hopefully we'll have a ghost walk come Halloween. Couldn't do it last year because of the pandemic, but I think we're ready for another ghost walk, and we'll talk about especially this window. Now we're coming into downtown South Salem. This is an older picture of the church taken probably from where you saw that last house. It's up on a little hillside looking down on the church. And I would say this picture is probably just pre-1900, about the turn of the century. And here's a closer look at the church. This particular church was built in 1872. The church was founded in 1752. Solomon Mead being its first pastor, and this is the Solomon Mead burial plot. My house was owned by his son, Martin Mead, and that's so that was one of his son's houses. And Martin, after Solomon retired, he came to live in my house, and it was the house that he died in. The churchyard is very old. The oldest graves go to the mid 1700s. The church stood quite well for a century, but on January 31st, I believe it was, of 1973, actually, from my little vantage point up on the hill a little bit, about 500 yards up the street, I was entertaining Ethelyn Finchbeck, my daughter's nursery school teacher. She had come for lunch, and our lunch was about over, and all of a sudden fire trucks started running down the street, and one was Ridgefield, one was Vista. So we looked out my kitchen window, and there was smoke coming from a little bit off, and I thought, oh my gosh, my neighbor's house is on fire. Well, Ethelyn went home to Ridgefield, and I got my kids and my baby carriage, and we went down the street, and it wasn't my neighbor's house. It was the church that was on fire. Luckily, the fire started or was noticed shortly after noontime, when the nursery school had dismissed, that was housed in the back addition attached to the church, and the church was a total loss. It was a real disaster. But the church was rebuilt, and we'll see that in a little bit. But after the church burned down, when it was warm enough, they held services outside, and this is one of those services. And then the Catholic Church came to their rescue and offered them quarters so that they could continue their services. And then when the new church was built, reciprocation came, and the St. Mary's Church in Katona used to have services in the new church, as did the Jewish Family Congregation. And here's the new church, which rose from the ashes. And again, a little closer look at the burial ground, which houses about 27 or 28 Revolutionary soldiers, and it is on the National Register of Historic Landmarks. The Gulf sign everybody loves, the iconic Gulf sign. Clipples Market, which was built around in the mid 1930s. Next to it, we see the building that is now Russell Antiques, but it was the South Salem Library at this point. Mr. Clipple was a well-liked store owner. He would take orders in the morning. He would send his teenage helpers around, who would go to basically the certain number of customers around Truesdale Lake area and South Salem. They would go house to house, take orders, bring them back, and then in the afternoon in their wagons, or if they were old enough to drive, they would deliver the orders from Clipples to the homeowners. You know where that Gulf sign is now? It was rescued from someone had taken it away, I guess, kind of legally. It was resting at someone's home. It was given back to the town, and now is firmly in place at Onatru. But the man who took the store over from Mr. Clipple, when Mr. Clipple retired, was none other than Silvio Lavatore, better known as Cy. Cy ran the market for many years, was well known and well loved by everyone in town. His meat was to die for. And it was kind of known that they made sausage. They made fresh sausage every Wednesday evening. And the sausage was as spicy as the beer and gin drunk the night before. So, but here he is tending to the fruit. But Cy was the beloved store owner by many, and the teenagers, maybe some of them watching us today may have worked for Cy and done the same thing, deliver groceries in their carts, or if they're old enough to drive um, by car. Behind the market is South Salem Public School number 2 or number 3. It was built in the late 80s, 1880s, and it was remarkable in that it was a 2-story. It was a 2-room schoolhouse, 2 stories. I'm not sure who these ladies are. One might be the teacher, although they might just be, they might be the 2 teachers. That would make sense. 2 teachers for a 2-room schoolhouse. This was the schoolhouse until 1941 when Lewisborough School was open, and the 5, every 1-room schoolhouse, let's see, Walkabuck, Cross River, South Salem. There were 2 in South Salem, and Vista went to Lewisborough School. Golden's Bridge did not go to the new Lewisborough School. But after this was no longer a school in 1941, it was became a rental, and it was rented for quite a while by a weaver, and she had a huge stash of wool. And in 1953, there was a tragic fire. Her wool, whether it was from spontaneous combustion or smoking, whatever, the old school caught on fire. She was overcome by smoke. The weaver was. She collapsed on the rug in the building. The fire burned around her, burned her image into the rug. And they say that this is another ghost story, that she is still living in that house searching for water. And another one of my ghost stories. So remember, come October, let's hope we can have our ghost story tour. Now we are standing in the, think about standing by St. John's Church, looking back down into the village. This is Linda Murphy's. I don't know who lives in there now. I think it's actually for sale for $1 million. And this was, I remember it as Linda Murphy's house. Across the street is Echo Farm. Here is the village store of Cyrus Lawrence. Here is Cyrus Lawrence's beautiful, beautiful after just post-Civil War house. Now we're going, the Horse and Hound is kind of, I don't think you can see it, although this might be it. This is going on up Spring Street, and the church, here's the church right here. We'll take a little closer up look. Here you can see the store, Lawrence's house, and this would be the manse for the church. Here we have going back down to the middle of town, across from the store, is the meeting house built in 1840 for the church. They would have actually town meetings would be held there, Sunday school would be held there. And around 1900, they gave the library use of it because before that, the library had been people's homes. So the library was given the use of this building, and this is where the library was until about 1909, and it was moved across the street. This is what it looked like in 1953, and here are some, or in the 1950s, and here it's getting a coat of paint. And then in 1960, a property was bought where you see the library today, and this was what it looked like as it was being built in 1960. You can see the entrance was in the front of the building, and there was going to be a circular driveway in front, which never happened. Over to the left here, the brand new post office was being built, and that was also ready about 1960. That opened in 1960, about a year before the library did. But here we are. This is what Spring Street or Main Street would have looked like in the 1920s. Here's a lovely picket fence, which Tim Keeler, in one of his interviews with me, told me how much he hated to have to whitewash that fence. It's kind of a Tom Sawyer story, but the Keeler house, which became our townhouse, is back behind that picket fence. And this is This is Main Street going north. Here's the manse that I mentioned in that close-up look. The manse was dismantled in 1881 when the church built a new manse. They cut this one in half, moved it across the street in two pieces. I believe one of the pieces is now Lou Taffer's law office, and I think the other piece was moved up the street a ways. Here we have the Horse and Hound, which was built in the late 1700s by the Keeler family. Before that, there was another house next to it. Before it was built, there was a house over here, which was the Gould Hawley house, and that was the former store and post office. But this was the Keeler home until for many years, until I believe it was in the early 1900s, like I said, when Van Norden bought it and renamed it the Horse and Hound and opened it as an inn. This is the Blacksmith Shop, which was built in 1840 by Henry Bocci Keeler, and he used it as his blacksmith shop. This is a newer picture of it, a postcard, probably from the early 60s, late 50s. I think it's from the 60s. I'm not sure, but this has housed many operations. The blacksmith shop, the antique shop, which I think was started by this is by Pauline Bray, who also ran the Horse and Hound as an inn, as a restaurant. And I think the most popular use of this little building was when Pizza Pete Onetto opened it as a what do you call it? A video store. And I think that's when it got the most use, when Pizza Pete ran it as a video store. However, it got a lot of complaints because there was so many cars that came with patrons for the store that the neighbors got very, very upset. So Pizza Pete and his videos were out. It sat vacant for a while, and now it is a yoga studio. This is the South Salem Memorial, actually Town of Lewisborough honor roll, which has over 100 names of veterans who served in World War II. This stood right on the lawn. Here's the church would be down here to the right. The big Lawrence house would be to the left a little bit down the street. And this was right across from the flagpole. That's the flagpole corners there. Horse and Hound, flagpole, and this stood up on that little knoll. However, at some point, probably around 1960, it disappeared, and it has never been found, despite looking in all the basements that the town of Lewisborough owned and other places. And right now there is a committee looking to renew some sort of a fitting memorial for the veterans of our town. But now we've got several more wards to add to the memorial. Here is that house that Cyrus Lawrence built in about 1866. Beautiful, beautiful house that is now owned by Patsy Orlovsky and Lou Taffer. And next door, Cyrus came about 1860 to open a store in South Salem, and this was his store. And the post office, because at that point, post offices tended to be in the general stores. So this served as a post office and general store during Cyrus Lawrence's lifetime for probably 25 or 30 years, and then it was turned over to a man named Ed Smith, and Ed Smith eventually moved it up Main Street, which we'll see in a little bit. Here we have the house, which is actually right now it's owned by Deirdre and Tom Casper. Deirdre is our tax collector, and it's right next to our current townhouse. This is another landmark house, and this house was built by Eli Keeler, who was a farmer and a very successful shoemaker. So another landmark house built in 1840. Now we have the townhouse. as it looked when the Keelers bought it back in the 1920s from the Studwell family. And a lot of changes have happened to this house. No more porch, a few additions to it, and we know it and love it today, I guess, as the townhouse. It's been brought up to date somewhat, and the kitchen is now the clerk's office, and the dining room is the town collector of taxes office, and the meeting room is the living room. But now, remember I said Ed Smith, after he was in the Cyrus Lawrence house farm, post office and store for a while, moved his store to the post office and post office down Main Street, going north. This is about 3 houses from the current post office. It's next to the post office. I mean, next to the new post office is a field, and then comes what was Happy Home Flowers, is now Gary Page's house. Then there's another house, and then this is now a private dwelling. But it was the post office from at least the 20s, I believe, until 1960. Now we're going the rest of the way down Main Street till we get almost to Boughton Road. And here we have the Jacob Hilbert, the Jacob, where we are. The Jacob Hilbert house, which was the prison for Major John Andre, alias John Anderson, colluded with Benedict Arnold to get the plans for West Point for the British forces. And John Andre was captured over near Tarrytown, and because he was a special prisoner, was brought here to South Salem, where Colonel Sheldon's dragoons were housed. This is the only action that South Salem or Lewisborough saw during the Revolutionary War, was to house this very famous prisoner during that war for 2 days. While Andre was there, he made this little sketch of himself, and a sketch, whether he made the sketch or not, I'm not sure, but he did this one. He also wrote to General Washington, telling him who he was. Nobody knew at that time that he was really a major adjutant to General Clinton of the British forces. They thought that since he was dressed as a civilian, he must have been a civilian. But he admitted who he was and asked for leniency from Washington. Civilians would be hanged. An officer, if he was convicted of being a spy, would be shot by rifle squad. And he definitely wanted the death of the soldier. Unfortunately, Washington was not able to grant his request for whatever reason the general had at the time, and he was hanged at Tappan. And this is where he spent several days of his life. And this plaque is in the stone wall just on the south side of Main Street, just before you get to Boughton Road. This is the Red Bridge Academy, which is the north school, the North one-room school, and it was located on a little hillside overlooking as the road turned, as Main Street turns to go toward Ridgefield. It would be kind of where the outlet to in a field not far from the outlet to the south end of the north end of Truesdale Lake. But unusual for a school at this time. It only had one door. It didn't have a girls' door and a boys' door. But in 1941, all of those one-room schoolhouses in our town, except for Golden's Bridge, became pupils at the at the South Salem Elementary School, later to be the Lewisborough Elementary School. Now that was on Boughton Road. And just past the school, we're going to come to the the Belton homestead, which was built by Captain Moses Belton. And just after in the just beginning, just the turn of the 19th century. He was a captain during the Revolutionary War, and he built this wonderful farmhouse. This is the front, and this is a side view, and it shows this wonderful porch. And according to Moses Belton's granddaughter, Louise Belton, who we'll meet shortly, the Leatherman used to come by during the 1850s and 60s. And he would stop at the Belton house, and Louise Belton's mother would give him a handout, and the Leatherman would sit on the porch and eat his handout, his sandwich or soup or whatever it was. This is Louise Belton. This would have been the son of Moses Belton. This is Aaron K. Belton. And this gentleman was the father of Louise and Les, who we'll meet momentarily. I love this picture of his carriage, dated 1894, on the back of the little postcard. So that's the Belton family is one of the founding families and very important at the beginning of our town. Here is Mary Louise Belton as a young woman. She was born in 1881. Here she is at age 92, wearing her great-grandmother's cape and dress. This is, I believe, was a church function. And here is Louise Belton went on. She studied to be a secretary, worked in New York City for a little bit, but came home, I believe, to take care of her mother, who was failing, and decided to stay. And she opened a nursery school. And she taught in that nursery school, first in the big homestead that you just saw. And then when that became too big, she and her brother Les bought a house on Salem, Upper Salem Road or Salem Road. And she taught nursery school until she was 96. And here she is in 1975, which is about the last time, the end of her years of nursery school, with her brother Les. Les Belton was a farmer in his earlier years, and actually was one of the people who helped Van Norden clear away swampland to begin the beginnings of Truesdale Lake. So here she is at 96. She died at age 105. So now we're going to take we're going back to the middle of town and just go slightly east and look at Truesdale Lake. This is the brochure from one of the brochures, prospectus for people who might want to live in the most beautiful section of Westchester County. And if you needed a map to know how to get there, here was the map. Away from the fog and dampness of the seashore, direct on main motor routes from New York City, Westchester, and Connecticut. And you can have your fishing, your boating, and your swimming, and live the life of luxury all summer. Let the dads go in to work in the city. Moms and the kids could enjoy Truesdale Lake. And these maps are a little off-putting. Here we have Truesdale Lake. It goes from downtown South Salem almost to North Salem, halfway to North Salem. It seems to have enveloped the three lakes up north, Wacabuck, Rippewam, and Oskaleta. So it was a mighty fantastic lake. There's another map that I had of another brochure, which showed it actually over the line in Connecticut. So I guess they were trying to entice the Connecticut people. But Lake Truesdale was a wonderful place to get away to and have your summer house. It started to be developed by Theodore Van Norden. He started buying up a lot of property and started developing the northern end of the lake, and then bought property from the Keelers for the northern end of the lake. And so the lake was greatly enlarged from its start around when a dam was being built at the north end of the lake in 1907 to the middle 1920s and until 1926 and 27, when the lake was finally large enough to entice people to buy anywhere from quarter-acre plots to slightly larger, bigger. There were some big houses, but most of them were modest summer houses that after World War II segued into being year-round houses. But first it was the front half, the town side, that was developed, and later on the back half. It was okay, but judging from 1927, it was just before the Depression hit, and so Truesdale Lake went quiet for a while. But in case you were in the way to buy a house, here's what your kitchen would look like. This is from the brochure, but I was looking through a magazine which somehow landed in my office, and I came across this ad from 1933 from the Country Gentleman, and I was amazed at how much. Here we have in color that Truesdale Lake kitchen. All right, now we are coming back from our little jaunt to Lake Truesdale, and this is Spring Street. We're coming up from town. This is the home now of the Tenay family, but when it was built in 1840, I believe, or I'm forgetting my dates on this house, but it was built by the Lawrence family, and the Lawrences were the family that owned what is now Echo Farm. And that farm was the Lawrences' farm for quite a while, until till somebody like Al Ridgway came along, and Al Ridgway bought the farm from Mary and Elizabeth Lawrence. He decided that he needed a place. He had been renting property from the Lawrences. Actually, let me go back a little way. Al Ridgway was one of the apparently most iconic and nicest gentlemen in town. A little rough around the edges, but a man who knew his own wants, knew the value of a dollar, and kind of like Howland Adams. They probably got along quite well. Anyway, Al was born in 1909. He served in World War II. And when he came home from World War II, he had been saving his money, sending it home to a friend to keep for him. So when he came home, he was able to buy a couple of cows. He segued a couple of cows until about 100 cows, but he had no farm. He housed these cows on different farms. One of those farms being the Lawrence farm in South Salem. So as things worked out, he bought his enough acreage from Mrs. Lawrence and one of the barns on the farm to start his own farm. First it was cows, but then after a while, it got to be so that the cows were getting in his way. He was getting tired of cows and all the government inspections that he had to go through to keep the milk living up the meeting the government standards. So by just some fluke, people started boarding horses, I'm sorry, at his farm. And he decided, okay, this is a good deal. And so he started boarding horses, and that just turned into what we know as Echo Farm today. One of his helpers on that farm was Madeline Kuntz, and she wrote a wonderful, wonderful little pamphlet about Al Ridgway after he passed away. He died in 2000 after a wonderful life of, I don't know how many teenagers he helped over, talking out their problems and coming there with their horses. Because a lot of people boarded their horses there. There was a riding area, and so the teenagers would come and learn. There would be horseback riding lessons, and many teenagers from the local area learned a lot about um, about the equine way of life. And one of those teenagers who worked on the farm was the daughter of Madeline Kuntz, and her name was Callie Kuntz. She's now Callie Bauer, and married to Keith Bauer. And when Al passed away, the farm was willed to Callie, and so Callie is now the owner of Echo Farm and has put a lot, a lot of work and expanded the farm. Huge riding rink now, and beautiful house. And Echo Farm is the pride of the village of South Salem. And you could just sit on the library lawn looking up and enjoying the pastoralness of Echo Farm. All of it thanks to Al Ridgway and his good idea from changing the way from cows to horses. And here we have a picture of Al Ridgway. Great, great gentleman. Lifelong bachelor, although, as Madeline says in her book, had a lot of lady friends. Just past Echo Farm, across the street, is St. John's Church, built in 1855, a local fieldstone, I believe, and it is part of the parish that includes St. Paul's out in the Lewisborough Vista area. Across the street from church, next to Echo Farm, bordering Echo Farm, is the South Salem the South Salem Cemetery, which the church graveyard had really was full by the middle 1800s, and so in about 1870, this property was built, and this graveyard, new cemetery was started, and this cemetery houses many Civil War veterans. It's a wonderful, peaceful place to visit, as most cemeteries are. If you go over here, you can look down on the horses at Echo Farm. And the several times that I've visited over the past couple of years, I've been joined by a flock of bluebirds. I thought it's a great place for bird watching, as well as just learning about the lives of people who came before us. Now we're just going to take a couple of rumblings around to different places. This is the first landmark house. It's called Peaceable Kingdom, and it's almost on the cusp of on 124, heading toward Pound Ridge, just before you go over the line, and it's right near the back end of the way into the res. It was built in 1734, probably by Joel Belton, and during the Revolutionary War, the Beltons were on the wrong side of the war for the Patriots, so they had to leave town, and the house was confiscated. But eventually, came back into the family, and became the home way in the was bought by Ted and Janice Strauss, who redid it to its 1700 splendor. It's a beautiful salt box, New England salt box, which kind of shows how our architecture in our town was greatly influenced by the architecture in New England. Here's another one. Unfortunately, I could not find my postcard of this, and to make it bigger doesn't help much, but Rebecca Grunsky came to the rescue when she sent me this postcard, wondering if I had this picture of Flood Farm. Flood Farm is on Boutonville Road. We would know it today, some of us, as the home of Colleen Dewhurst, when Colleen and George C. Scott moved to town. Well, George moved away shortly after that, but Colleen kept the farm. She called it the farm, and it was the site of many parties, both for neighbors and for all of Colleen's theatrical friends who would just come and hang out. It was kind of a place to take off your shoes and enjoy the the domestic cooking and wonderful hospitality of Colleen and friends. But it it actually, if you look at this postcard, it says RFD Ridgefield, Connecticut. And the Ridgefield history people got very confused, saying, we don't know any Flood Farm. So contacted me and said, oh yes, I know Flood Farm quite well. It's a beautiful place. And it belonged to this wonderful woman, Colleen Dewhurst. Colleen was so giving of her time to the town of Lewisborough. She even didn't sponsor, she co-coached a girls softball league team for the town, and she gave of her time and her talent generously to the South Salem Library, doing several readings. She was always came to the library fair, and she would, if she was able to work it into her schedule, was always able to host or play lady of ceremonies for town goings on. Sorely missed lady who was a wonderful actress and a wonderful townsperson. Now we have Jeremiah Keeler. Going back, now we're going to back to get into the folks that lived on the hill, kind of the end, coming to the end of our little summary here of life in South Salem. Jeremiah Keeler was born in 1760 as quite a young man. He was still a teenager when he decided to join forces and join the war after the Battle of Ridgefield, and was present at the storming of Yorktown in Virginia with General Lafayette at the end of the war. And because of his bravery, he was supposedly, as the Keeler story goes, he was awarded a sword by General Lafayette, and he used that sword as a walking stick to walk home from Virginia to Richfield and South Salem. If you look closely in this picture, Jeremiah is holding on to a sword. You can see the hills and the handle, and you can see the sword going up this way. I love his hat. Anyway, he lived to be a ripe old age and was a favorite of people in town. He had lots of great stories to tell. Jeremiah built when he got back from the war, he married, and around 1795, he built the big white house that's on the corner of 123 and 35. I did not bring a picture for this little walk around today, but you all know where the house is. It's right at the corner by the traffic light. You can't help but look up at it today. And that's Jeremiah built that house using wood from the abandoned Episcopalian church, the first Episcopalian church, which had been abandoned when the Patriots ran the Episcopalian minister away. And the church then became a hospital during the Battle of Ridgefield, and then it became a tavern when the gentleman bought the church, and that gentleman and Jeremiah Keeler reached an agreement, and Keeler took part of the church and built his house with the church tavern. And here's another picture of that sword. That sword, or a sword, mysteriously turned up at the South Salem, which it was back then, now the Lewisborough Library, turned up at the South Salem, a sword turned up in a long skinny box in the 1970s. And it was purported to be the sword that Jeremiah Keeler walked home from Virginia in. Well, a long story short, the sword looks nothing like this sword, and it has been a mystery ever since. And Priscilla Luco, who took a fancy into finding out about the sword, and with something I happened to turn up in my office, she took the newspaper article, and ran with it. And it turns out now that this may be the Keeler sword, but the sword at the library is probably the Fancher sword. And there's a whole dossier on that now, which pretty soon, hopefully, when the library reopens, the sword might go on display with a little bit about its history and why it's not the Keeler sword, but the Fancher sword. Going back to the Keelers, if you're at that same traffic light, but you're coming from 123 and you look straight across the intersection and look up on the hill, you have to look up. If you don't look up, you probably won't think it's know it's there, but it's the Keeler family cemetery. It's set up in a circle around center obelisk, and it's got many Keeler family burials, including Jeremiah and his wife Huldah. At one point, Huldah's stone apparently broke, and it was tossed away behind what is now the state police station and town property. For the broken Huldah stone was thrown away. And when some town employees were cleaning up the property there, they found this stone, thought they had uncovered a grave, got very upset, talked to the Keelers. Turned out it was a broken stone. And to make a long story short, the stone is now in my backyard because it's too heavy to move anyplace, but it belongs to the town historian's archives. However, if you want to see it, it's in my backyard. And Huldah is still resting peacefully in this cemetery. All right, folks on the hill. Now, the more famous ones. We come to, this is a picture of Le Chateau, but it wasn't always Le Chateau. Back in go to the backstory, just before the turn of the century. It depends on what you read. This property was either purchased in 1895 by William Rainsford, who was the pastor of J.P. Morgan's church, Episcopalian church in New York City, St. George's Church. Well, J.P. Morgan and Rainsford, the pastor, were very close friends most of the time. They did have their disputes, but when Rainsford resigned and was no longer pastor, J.P. Morgan asked him what he'd kind of like in his retirement, and the pastor said, "Well, I kind of like a place in the country." For whatever reason, J.P. Morgan thought, "Oh, that's a good idea." So one story that articles that you read say that J.P. Morgan bought this property in 1907 for Rainsford. However, other things said that Rainsford probably bought the property, whether he bought it with money or a loan from J.P. Morgan or whatever, he probably bought it about a decade earlier. Anyway, the house was not built until 1907, and it was quite a wonderful house called Savin Rock, and it was designed by Attenbury and Attenbury, well-known architects in New York City. And I'll just read a little bit of what it featured. And now maybe the money came from J.P. Morgan to build the house, and maybe it was Rainsford who bought the property, or maybe, who knows? Anyway, it came to be this wonderful house with all sorts of leaded glass windows, oak and cherry rooms trimmed in oak and cherry, a grand staircase, stone fireplace, and large windows framing the different gardens. Rainsford lived in the house when he was in Africa. He was also a friend of Teddy Roosevelt, and occasionally, or at least once, accompanied Roosevelt to Africa to collect specimens, which some of them, probably most of them, were stored in the basement of the American Museum of Natural History. Some were on display. But he and Teddy Roosevelt were good friends. However, there's another story going around that maybe one of the reasons that J.P. Morgan liked the Rainsford, was quite friendly with him, was that maybe he had a liaison with Rainsford's wife, and maybe it was more to that he saw to build this wonderful house. Who knows? Eventually, Rainsford himself was defrocked from the Episcopalian Church for his dalliance with somebody outside of his own marriage. Now, the other question is, why would Rainsford have come to South Salem? Why did he find this wonderful, wonderful hillside? It might have been because he did suffer from depression. And occasionally those bouts of depression would take him to Europe on a get well tour, or to Africa on a get well tour, or to Dr. Pierce Bailey. And Dr. Pierce Bailey, we heard about in our Cross River little tour, because he was the builder of Four Winds, and he also was a noted psychiatrist. And perhaps Rainsford had been, actually, I'm pretty sure that Rainsford had been a patient of Pierce Bailey, and maybe in his visits with the renowned doctor learned about our town, and that's why both men ended up here. Speculation is all that we can talk about. However, after Rainsford died in 1933, Seven Rock was on the market, and it was bought by a man named Frederick Samson of Connecticut. He kept it for a while, well, from 1933 until 1960. And then he sold it to a party who thought that the house and its 30 acres would make a wonderful place for a Roman Catholic convent and novitiate. Well, that deal never went through. So in 1966, it was up for sale again, and it was seriously considered as a golf and country club by a group of people, and that group of people included Jackie Robinson of the Brooklyn Dodgers at that point, and also Joe Louis, the ex-prize fighter. They were going to call it Pleasant Valley. However, the group's reception was not pleasant. Lawsuits were brought against the proposal, and the proposal was dropped. Even though the zoning board of appeals did give this project, there was too much animosity, and it did not go through. However, later on, another project was proposed to have a swim and tennis club called West Fair. Well, that never materialized either. And so by the late 1960s, it became a squatter's haven. It became a great place to go smoke your weed and just hang out. And it kind of went to rack and to ruin until in 1971, the Lozak family bought it and turned it into Le Chateau. And then Le Chateau served as a wonderful restaurant for many years, bringing many people here to enjoy South Salem's French ambiance on the hillside, until it now is, it went vacant for a little bit and is now a wedding and event area. Here's a picture of that wonderful William Rainsford, and quite a gentleman, from a big game hunter, minister, and tour of Africa. Now we're going to the other hillside, which is basically across the street from Le Chateau, and we're going to what once was James Kaplan's, James Crafts estate. James Crafts was a scientist, basically a chemist, who at one point for a couple of years was president of MIT. When he retired, he decided to come to South Salem and build his retirement home, or his summer home, actually started as the summer home on the hillside of right across from Le Chateau. And this house was built around 1900. James Crafts had a lab on the property, which if you take your hike on the property, which is now the Leon Levy Preserve, as you come up the driveway toward what's known as the Black Mansion at the top, you'll pass what is purported to be his chem lab. He spent a lot of time in France, and because he did a lot of his chemistry work in Europe. He also, though, was a townsperson. He was on the library board, and also contributed a lot of his own books to the library, as was his good buddy Theodore Van Norden. So this house was owned by Crafts until he died, and it was uh, bought by the Kaplan family, who were very wealthy real estate owners of real estate in New York City. They also were important in the sugar import industry and in the Western lumber industry. Very wealthy family. However, Mrs. Kaplan decided this house was much too drafty for her, and she didn't like living there even though it was a magnificent house. The heating and the plumbing were really not up to her standards, and so she decided she'd move the family down to another house on the property, the first big white house on Ridgefield Avenue, which was long the house of the Peritons. And that's where her three children grew up. And this house was left, it was kind of one of those great expectation places. Everything was left, like out of Dickens, if you don't know that reference. Everything was left as was. Tables set, all the furniture in place, all the organ, the pictures, the drawings, the chandeliers, which soon became property of people who would visit this house. And like Le Chateau, it became somewhat of a squatter's area. This is a picture of James M. Crafts himself. I don't think there ever was a tennis court at his place, but obviously he's here seeing how well he can bounce a tennis ball. The Kaplans had three children, as I mentioned, who grew up down on Ridgefield Avenue: Ezra and Joel, and I think the sister was Susan. I can't remember her name, but Ezra continued to live in South Salem on one of the other property homes on another property homes on the property. Joel decided he liked the life of a mercenary and a person of adventure, and he did some gun running between the Caribbean and the United States. And at some point found himself in Mexico, involved in a murder, was put in one of the horrible Mexican prisons, and a life sentence. But about that time, his father died and left an inheritance for each of the three kids, and Joel was not around to collect it. So his sister lived in California, rather wealthy, well, with her part of the inheritance anyway, decided that it was a good idea if they sprang Joel from his Mexican jail. So a plot was hatched, and sister hired a helicopter. Helicopter landed in the courtyard of the prison. Joel and another buddy climbed in and were whisked back up in the helicopter and back to the United States, where he lived. I don't know whether he lived happily ever after. He did not ever go back to his prison. He died several years ago. I don't exactly remember when, but he married, and actually this jailbreak was made into a movie. And I don't know whether it was Pierce Brosnan. I forgot to look it up before today to see who the people were in the movie. But if anybody has seen the 10-second jailbreak, you'll know what I'm talking about. Now we're going to another hillside. And this is probably the most famous of the hillsides we're going to visit today. This house is from the 1880s. It was built by Ebenezer Wood, known as Czar. And it was one of the most fancy houses at the time, that it was built in the late 1800s. This is the Ebenezer or the Czar Wood family, I'm assuming, out in front of the house. But today we know it as Farview Farm. I did not put in a picture of the house. Doesn't look too much different from there. Little fewer porch, less porch, but this is the view that is kind of an iconic view for the South Salem hamlet. If you don't know where it is on Route 35 on the south side of the road, looking up on top of the hill. And it's right where Spring Street South comes in from one direction and Spring Street North goes down into the town. It's right across from where the beginning of this show, where we saw the sign that said South Salem Hamlet Center. But this is Henry Wallace's, this is the home of Henry Aggard Wallace, who was vice president for Franklin Roosevelt, and also was his Secretary of Agriculture for 2 terms, as well as he served on some war boards too. But his father, Henry Wallace's father and grandfather, were both secretaries of agriculture. The family came from Iowa, but when Henry Wallace was ditched from the Roosevelt presidential campaign in 1944, he decided to stay in the area, and in 1946 bought the Farview Farm property. Here's a picture of Henry Wallace in probably the late 50s. And he decided when he, well, first of all, in 1948, he decided to run for president on a third party. Unfortunately, it wasn't a very successful run, but he was the only person, I think, in the history of our town to run for president while living in our town. And he was up against Thomas Dewey and Harry Truman. So we know that Harry Truman won that election, even though the papers declared Thomas Dewey they had to recant on that. But Henry Wallace retired into the life of a farmer, which is what he really liked best. And he had several quests. One was to perfect a lavender gladiola. One was to produce a chicken that would be a very good layer and a meat chicken, instead of having one breed for each of those purposes, one breed that would serve both purposes. And all of that was done, all of that hybridizing and searching for this breed that he wanted was done here at Farview Farm. He also was into hybridizing corn, and the Wallace family made their money from Pioneer, or most of their money from the Pioneer Seed Company, which was based out in Iowa, and which perfected hybridized corn, which meant that the farmers could no longer, if they planted the hybridized corn, they no longer could save the seeds and plant them again, because they would not run true. If they planted hybridized seeds, they would not ring true to what they had planted the next year. He was well known in town. He also participated in events around town, especially fire. He would judge fire department parades and be masters of ceremonies, even though he was basically a shy person and kept a low profile, but was very generous in his contributions around town. Unfortunately, especially for those chickens, one night in the early 1960s, the fire alarm at the firehouse went off, and Henry Wallace's barn burned to the ground. The barn was rebuilt, but it was a tragedy at that point, and many chickens were cooked prematurely that night. And on this, we're going to end. Another picture, that first picture of the barn and this one were taken by a good friend of my son and also of me, Chris Tanay, who happened to be visiting his mom down there at the Echo Farmhouse. And this is titled Winter at Farview Farm. And it's a beautiful picture. These golden clouds can kind of assurance that even though this is winter, it looks like springtime will be coming soon. Now, I'm going to close this and see if we can go back to the first picture and see if people can guess what, if this is successful and everybody, so there's people still there, we'll see if we can answer those questions.
Where are they going, Maureen? Of course they're still
I don't
here.
know where they're going. Let's see if we can, oh, that's not gonna work. What do I wanna do? I wanna go back to this and that scene,
I'm still seeing the farm.
okay. What did we do wrong again? Can you see it now, partway? No,
Nope.
no, all
Let's
right.
close it down and start.
Yeah, let's go back.
Well, while you're figuring
Oh,
that out, I
wait,
found the movie was called Breakout
Breakout, okay,
with
good.
Joel David Kaplan. It starred Charles Bronson, Robert
Charles
Duvall,
Bronson,
and a very young Randy Quaid.
okay, okay.
Thank goodness for Google.
Thank you very much. I forgot to do it before this. However, what do I need to do? Let's see. No, I don't want to do that. All right. No, it's still coming back that way, isn't it?
We still have
We still have the
Fairview
fun.
Farm.
Okay, well, I don't know what we did last time. All right, let me just say what the numbers are, okay? The first years are 1731 to 1783. Who knows what the town was called then? Any takers?
You may unmute yourself to guess.
Salem.
Hi,
Salem.
Emily.
Salem it was, okay. Then 1783 to 1806. Anybody have a thought? It didn't change much.
Upper Salem.
Pardon?
Upper Salem?
Uh-oh. Nope. Lower Salem. Guess what Upper Salem was?
North Salem.
North Salem. And I'm continually being teased by a certain couple of North Salem people that we were Lower Salem and they were Upper Salem. But after a while, from 1806 to 1840, we had another name. Anybody know? Ah, not too hard.
South Salem.
You got it. That was South Salem. And then in
I'll give
1840,
Jane all the credit because she put it up.
who?
Jane Zettler. Sorry.
Okay, good, good. And then from 1840 to the present, it's our beloved Lewisborough.
Not your beloved, but
No, I know. If I had the money to go back to South Salem.
we do have questions.
Okay.
We'll start at the beginning. What do you think is the architectural style of the old Hilbert house?
The Hilbert?
Yep.
Oh, it's Victorian, a mansarded roof Victorian. I think it has a mansard roof. It's definitely late Victorian because it was built in around 1870.
And what would you call the architectural style of both Cyrus Russell and that townhouse? They're both very similar.
Very similar, built at the same time, 1870. I'm not an architect student, so I don't know whether I have to tell you it's Queen Anne or somebody else. But
This is almost over.
I'm gonna get you.
Oh, hang on, let me just mute somebody. Okay. Sorry
Okay.
about that. Going back to your model ships that you have,
Yeah, I love them.
do you know what they're made out of?
Though they were made out of metal, a lead, probably. I'm not sure if they were. Yeah, some were wooden, but most of them were metal, and they may have been lead.
Yeah,
Some of-
somebody asked if they were made out of lead.
They don't. I've got a bunch, and even the little ones don't bend. So, sometimes lead can be very soft. I forgot to say the largest one I've ever seen belonged to Elisha Keeler, who owned Happy Home Flowers. But I visited him in Florida, and on top of Elisha's piano was one of the ships, and it was as long as his upright piano. Elisha had that ship because he was the shop steward at the studios at one point, and so I guess Enzo Yaka gave him the ship, but it was huge. Imagine the top of an upright piano, down to the size of half of my pinky. But I'll have to check, and next time I'm going to go to my office with something and see if I can prove what kind of metal it was.
Okay. Somebody asked if the Keeler Tavern is related to Jeremiah Keeler.
Cousins, it's all the same family, but I don't think Jeremiah necessarily was directly, it wasn't his father or his probably was a cousin or an uncle. They're all related. And so North Salem as well. The Keelers are all over.
And then there was a question about, was there ever a plan in the 1950s to move the UN to South Salem or Lewisborough? And your
Sure.
buddy Tony actually went and Googled it, but
Oh
South
my
Salem
gosh.
didn't come up on it.
Oh, yeah. And when the townhouse vault opens again, I can show you the huge file. There's a banker's box of surveys that went out to people during the 40s, or the 46 was when it was first suggested that the headquarters be in New York, the New York area. Well, it was rumored they were looking at Stamford, they were looking at Greenwich, they were looking at Pound Ridge, they were looking here, and people were against it. There were very few people who wanted it. And had that gone in, had that happened, the property they were looking for, forget the oblong, it would have come, where we just went down Spring Street? It would have come as far as my house and going, it would have come right here. I would have been living on the land. They envisioned a town, with the building, whatever housing they needed for the work for the delegates, but they also were going to have houses where people would live, who were part of the organization. So it was going to be huge. And I think they were also looking where Westchester County Airport is now and was then too. Well, hello, dog. You broke out.
Where was the actual building?
Where was it? Oh, I was going to be someplace in these acres and acres and acres. However, the Rockefeller, I believe it was the Rockefeller, said, "Hey, I've got this great piece of property on the East River. I'll make you a deal." So that's why it is where it is. But it was not, I think the movers and shakers wanted it because they figured it would be really good for the local economy. But in our town, it would have taken all of probably Lewisborough and South Salem, good part of South Salem hamlets, and part of Pound Ridge too. but when things open up, it was a huge thing. And you should read the what people said about having it come here, because there's it was a great deal of we don't want that. It was like not in my backyard. It was not in my front yard. It was not in my yard at all.
Was Somers considered at the IBM location?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm only worried about what was going to be here. And there were lots of places, actually, I think even out on the West Coast.
Oh yeah, Tony had pulled up a lot of spots. West Coast was part of it, Canadian, United States border, the Midwest.
Yep. There was a committee of head honchos from the different countries going around looking at all these places. Yeah, that was a really big deal. But
And that is all the questions that came through on the chat. I don't know if anyone wants to unmute themselves to ask any more of Maureen. Feel free to. Oh, that looks like it could be it, Maureen.
oh, well, I think we tired everybody out.
So we'll just remind everyone that the next one will be in 2 weeks. And the hamlet of Wakabuck with its 3 lakes. And we do post these on, I don't put them on our website, but they are on Facebook. And if anyone wants to review one of the ones I've sent out, feel free to give me an email and I will send you which one you might have missed. And I did give them to Henry to cut and paste and try to make videos for LCTV. So he's working on that as well. So thank you all. Anyone else have any questions before we shut it down?
All right.
Okay.
See you in 2 weeks.
Thank you so much. It's always wonderful.
Thank you, Marianne.
Lots of people are thanking you, Maureen.
All right. Appreciate it.